So, I'll be honest. When I first heard about Arcane, I almost didn't watch it. It was 2021. Someone told me it was based on League of Legends, and I had never played League of Legends. Never even watched someone play it. And every gaming adaptation I'd seen before that had been some version of the same thing. Characters I didn't know, doing things I didn't care about, in a world that existed to sell more of the game. I had no reason to think this was different. Then I saw the trailer, and I stopped. The animation was doing something I genuinely couldn't name. Fortiche, the French studio behind it, had combined 3D animation with 2D painterly textures in a way that made every frame look like a moving illustration. Like someone figured out how to make a painting breathe. I'd seen a lot of animation. I had not seen that. So I watched it with a friend the week it dropped. And when the first episode ended, I looked at him, and we just sat there for a second. And I remember thinking, the writing is doing something I haven't seen before. I finished season 1 in 2 sittings. By the end, I was in awe. Every video about Arcane starts with the animation. I get it, but the thing that kept pulling me back wasn't the visuals. It was that I actually cared what happened to these people. And I went back to figure out why. Because gaming adaptations don't do that. They don't build real people. They import characters from the game and build a story around them. Arcane did the opposite. It built real people and let the game's version of them be where those people ended up. That's the whole show. And that's what this video is about, the writing. The craft underneath the paint. Gaming adaptations fail for a reason that's almost embarrassingly consistent once you see it. Studios treat the source material as the product, and the story as the packaging. The game comes first. The characters, the world, the lore, they all get imported wholesale, and the writers are handed the job of building a story around things that already exist. The result is almost always the same. A show that works as a reference guide for existing fans, and means almost nothing to anyone else. Think about what that looks like in practice. Characters who arrive already formed, with personalities that don't grow from anywhere, whose presence in the story is justified by the fact that they were in the game. Plot decisions driven by what the IP needs rather than what the story needs. Moments designed to make someone who played the game go, "Oh, I recognize that," while everyone else just watches and waits. The Halo show did this. The Witcher did this across 3 seasons until it collapsed under the weight of its own lore. Arcane solved it, and the way they solved it is the thing I want to spend time on, because it completely reframes how you watch the show. Vi is a champion in League of Legends. She's a tank brawler with giant mechanical gauntlets who punches things very hard. That's what she is in the game. In Arcane, she's a kid on a bridge, standing over her parents' bodies with a look on her face that has no tears in it, only rage, while her little sister clings to her arm. The game version of Vi is where she ends up. The girl on the bridge is who she actually is. The creators built real people and let the story carry them forward into who the game needed them to be. The destination was always the same. The journey is what made you believe it. That's the whole show. Every character in it. Before any of that can work, you need to understand where these people live, because Arcane does something with its world that most fantasy stories only gesture at. The environment isn't backdrop, it's argument. Piltover and Zaun are 2 cities that share the same geography and almost nothing else. Piltover sits above, literally above, built up on elevated structures, catching the light, all gold and clean lines and Art Deco geometry, a city that looks like it was designed to project confidence. Zaun is underneath it, physically underneath, in the shadow of what Piltover built. Toxic air, tight neon corridors, people coughing in the streets. The architecture alone tells you everything about who has power and who doesn't, and the show never stops to explain this to you. It just shows you where people live, and trusts you to feel what that means. Piltover's council chambers have a table designed so that the people sitting at it can't see past each other to what's below. That's not an accident. Zaun's markets are underground because the surface was taken. The bridge connecting both cities is a checkpoint, a border crossing, a place where people from below get reminded they need permission to move through the world above them. The show tells you all of this in the opening scene, without once saying it out loud. As Vi and Powder walk through the bodies of their parents, Powder is singing a children's song called Dear Friend Across the River. The lyrics are about a poor child asking a wealthy neighbor for a single penny, believing in the friendship between them, trusting that the person across the river is good. The images underneath those lyrics are dead Zaunites and armored Piltover enforcers. The friendship was always a fantasy. 6 episodes later, Jinx walks across that same bridge humming the same tune, having just killed a squad of enforcers. The song hasn't changed. Everything around it has. There's a moment early in the show where Vi looks up at Piltover from the Undercity. She's standing in the dark, looking at the light. The camera doesn't comment on it. There's no music swell. The image just sits there and does its work. By the time any character opens their mouth, you already understand what they're fighting over. You don't need it explained because you've already seen it. That's the difference between a world that's been written and a world that's been built. And that world does something the script needs it to do. It means you already understand the stakes before a single character is introduced. So when the show puts Vi and Powder on that bridge, you don't need to be told what it means. You already know. Look at what that opening scene actually does, beyond the setting. Vi and Powder on the bridge. the wreckage still burning, enforcers standing over the aftermath. Vi doesn't cry. She looks at the enforcers with a fury that's already deciding what this moment means about the world. Powder grabs her sister's arm and doesn't let go. 2 kids, 2 reactions to the same loss. No dialogue about their history, their personalities, their relationship. All of it is right there in what they do with their bodies in the 30 seconds after their world ends. Vi is already deciding she'll handle this by hitting back. Powder is already terrified that the people she loves will leave. That terror is what the whole show is actually about, but we'll get there. Jayce gets a flashback. He's a child, freezing to death in a blizzard with his mother, and then a mage appears with a crystal that glows blue, and the cold stops. That's it. That's his whole motivation handed to you in 90 seconds. Magic saved him. He's going to spend his life trying to give that to other people. Everything he does in both seasons flows directly from that moment. You understand him completely before he says a single word as an adult. Silco's introduction does something different. When you first see him properly, he's physically small, surrounded by enormous mutated men, operating in an environment that should dwarf him. He looks like he wandered in from somewhere else. And then you watch him work, the way he reads people, the way he positions himself, the way he speaks as if every word is a tool he's using for a purpose. And the physical smallness stops mattering entirely. He doesn't dominate spaces through size. He does it through understanding exactly what everyone around him needs and exactly how to use that. Viktor gets a flashback too, but it runs the other direction from Jayce's. A young Viktor builds a mechanical toy boat and sets it loose on the water. His creation works perfectly. It speeds away. He tries to run after it and falls, because his leg won't let him keep up with the thing his mind built. That image is 4 seconds long, and it tells you his entire arc. He will always be able to build things that go further than he can follow. The question the show spends 2 seasons asking is what he'll be willing to sacrifice to close that gap. None of these introductions have a character explaining who they are. The shows that fail do this. They build a character profile and then find moments to deliver it. Arcane builds moments and lets the character emerge from them. There's a character in the show called Heimerdinger. He's ancient, a founding member of Piltover's ruling council, supposedly one of the greatest scientific minds alive. He tells everyone this, constantly. He delivers speeches about his wisdom and his care for the people, and his long perspective on things. And across the whole of season 1, the show never once shows him acting on any of it. He doesn't help the Undercity. He blocks the people who are doing science, warns endlessly about danger without offering alternatives, and gets voted off the council partly because Jayce correctly points out he's done nothing about the shimmer addiction destroying Zaun, despite centuries of supposed stewardship. He talks about his values, and the camera quietly refuses to agree with him. That gap between what a character claims and what the show actually shows is the argument about Piltover's leadership in a single person. Season 2 gives him a chance to earn it. Stripped of his council seat, he ends up in the Undercity with Echo and the Firelight refugees. He entertains children with a bubble machine. He diagnoses the dying tree at their hideout and goes into stealth mode in the Piltover lab to find a cure. Heimerdinger, 300-year-old former council member, doing stealth missions. The show plays it completely straight and it works. He does, quietly, the things he spent season 1 speechifying about. No announcement, no redemption arc declared out loud. He just starts doing them. Heimerdinger wasn't wrong about his values. He just needed to lose his power before he could actually live by them. So the introductions work. You believe these people. But knowing who they are is only half of it. The show goes one step further. It shows you what broke them. And that's what makes every decision they make feel inevitable rather than convenient. Every character in Arcane is built around something missing, an absence that shapes every choice they make, that they're either trying to fill or trying to outrun. In screenwriting, this is called the wound. The thing that happened before the story started that explains why the character moves through the world the way they do. Most shows handle this through backstory, a scene that explains the trauma, and then it sits there as information the audience holds on to. Arcane does something different. It makes the wound visible in how the character behaves right now, in every scene, so you're always watching them carry it, even when nobody's talking about it. Vi's wound is guilt that never found a place to land. She made a choice in a moment of total devastation, and she's been paying for it ever since. When she finally gets out of Stillwater Prison, you see it immediately. The way she leads with her fists before she leads with anything else. The way she throws herself between danger and the people she cares about, over and over, as if enough punishment will eventually settle the debt she owes. She's been trying to settle it from the moment it opened. Powder's wound is the same moment from the other side. Her sister looked at her and left. That's the information her brain has been working with ever since, and you can see it in everything. The way she reads every interaction for signs she's about to be dropped. The way she swings between performing competence and completely falling apart. When Silco finds her right after, hysterical and alone, he doesn't have to do much. He just has to stay. And for Powder, who became Jinx, someone staying is the most powerful thing in the world. Jayce's wound is the blizzard. Not the trauma of nearly dying, but the opposite. The fact that something miraculous stepped in and saved him. He built his entire identity around recreating that miracle, and with it, a blind spot. Magic saved him, so magic must be something that can only do good. Every political compromise he makes in Season 1 is filtered through that belief. The blind spot costs everyone around him before the first season ends. Viktor's wound is his body. He grew up in the Undercity with a physical condition that was slowly killing him, watching people around him die from things that shouldn't be fatal, things that would have been solved immediately if they'd been born above. When he finally gets out, he doesn't celebrate, he works. There's an urgency to everything he does that reads as brilliance, but is actually dread. The drive to fix suffering is real and earned. What the show traces is the exact moment that need tips from fixing it to eliminating it entirely, and how much gets lost in that transition. The wounds don't explain the characters, they power them. Every decision, every relationship, every act of cruelty or kindness traces back to this original absence. That's why watching Arcane feels different from watching most shows. You're watching people try to outrun something that's been with them since the beginning. Powder's wound doesn't just shape her, it becomes her. Powder becomes Jinx across 6 episodes. It's the arc that carries the whole show on its back. She starts as the youngest member of her found family, Vi's little sister. Technically gifted, but catastrophically unlucky. Always the one whose plans go sideways at the worst possible moment. The family loves her. She also endangers them, regularly. Because her gifts and her execution are wildly misaligned, and the gap between what she means to do and what actually happens keeps getting people hurt. The monkey bomb is the moment everything breaks. She meant to help. She was trying to help. The device worked exactly as she'd designed it, and it went off at exactly the wrong time, and it killed the people she loved most. And then Vi, at the absolute end of her own grief, looked at her with something that felt like blame and left. That's the wound. That's the engine for everything that comes after. Silco finds her right after, which I already mentioned, and I want to come back to this because it's easy to read him as a predator who spotted an opportunity. That reading lets everyone off the hook too easily. Silco raises Powder in the image of his own damage, teaches her that the world abandons people, that the chaos inside her is useful rather than something to be afraid of, that power only comes from being willing to go further than anyone else. He does this because he recognized the wound she was carrying as his own, and his only frame for surviving that wound was the one he passed down. He looks at a grieving child and sees himself. He shapes her into it. Jinx spends both seasons searching for permission to be one thing or the other, the chaotic force that Silco named and raised, or Powder, the girl Vi remembers, the person she was before everything went wrong. Every time she gets close to one answer, something pulls her back toward the other. The tea party sequence at the end of Season 1 is the show at its absolute best. Jinx has Vi and Silco in the same room, both of them representing a version of who she might be, and she has to choose. She's holding a weapon, she's crying, and then she accidentally kills Silco, the one person who never stopped claiming her. His last words aren't dramatic, they're parental. Don't cry, you're perfect. He says it while dying from wounds she gave him. That's the most functional thing Silco ever does as her father, and he does it in his last breath. She destroys the Piltover Council immediately after. The grief and the rage and the total absence of anywhere to put it come out as an explosion aimed at the world. And if you felt something at Silco's death, you weren't supposed to resist that. The show built him to be grieved. A man who poisoned his own city, who raised a child inside his trauma, who was by any measure a monster. And yet, when he said "you're perfect" with his last breath, you understood that he meant it. That's not accidental. That's the show doing something genuinely difficult, making you hold a villain's love and his damage in the same hand at the same time, without letting you put either one down. Season 2 gives her something she's never had before. A kid named Isha, a young girl from the Undercity who ends up in Jinx's orbit and doesn't run. Jinx steps into something like a protective role almost against her own will, and watching it is genuinely strange, because she's so obviously unqualified and so obviously trying. She doesn't know how to do this. She has no model for it that didn't involve Silco's kind of love, which was real, but broken, which claimed her without ever actually freeing her. Isha treats her like a person, and Jinx, who hasn't been treated that way in a very long time, doesn't quite know what to do with it. There's a version of her in those scenes that you haven't seen since early episode 1, something lighter, Still chaotic, still her, but with room to breathe. When Isha sacrifices herself to stop the mutated Warwick, the loss closes the last door. Jinx's final act in the show is the only version of healing the show allows her. She reaches over and takes the Hex Gem out of Vi's gauntlet. The gauntlet opens. She tells Vi to make the jump to safety. Then she grabs Warwick and they go over the edge together, pulling the pin as they fall. Her last words to Vi are, "I'll always be with you, always with sis." She ends the cycle the only way available to her. Not by healing, by choosing who takes the damage. It's a tragedy that earns its ending because you watched every step. So, we're about halfway through, and the thing that's been accumulating across the world section, the introductions, the wounds, and now Jinx, is this. Every piece of craft we've been looking at serves the same purpose. It makes the people real before anything happens to them. The world exists to explain why they're angry. The wounds exist to explain what they're carrying. The introductions exist to prove who they are before the story tests them. Jinx's arc is what happens when all three of those things converge in one character at once. That's why she hits the way she hits. I want to stay with Jinx longer, but the show doesn't let you, because while all of that is happening, there's a parallel story running about a completely different kind of destruction. Powder's wound came from love failing her. Viktor's wound is that love was never enough to begin with. Viktor's arc asks a question that sounds philosophical, but lands as something much more personal. At what point does the desire to end suffering become its own kind of violence? Silco describes his own near drowning in the show's third episode as peace in water, whispering in low tones to let it in. He means Zaun's submission to Piltover, the seductive comfort of accepting your own drowning. Viktor's arc is the same temptation from the other side. Accept death and be forgotten, or push past every limit and become something that can't die. Both men chose to fight the water. The difference is what that fight cost them. He came from the Undercity. He watched people die from things that shouldn't be fatal. He got out through brilliance and determination and the friendship of Jayce, who saw what he could do and gave him a platform. The Hextech work they do together changes lives. The Hexgates bring Piltover an era of prosperity. The technology works. Viktor's problem is that his body is still failing, and the closer he gets to changing the world, the more the fact of his own mortality feels like an injustice rather than just a fact. The Hex Core, a device that responds to organic matter, offers him something. He takes it. His assistant Skye dies as a result. That line, once crossed, doesn't get uncrossed. If you're finding this useful, a like or a subscribe helps the channel a lot. Anyway, by season 2, Viktor has evolved, literally, shedding his physical limitations and becoming something between human and machine. His followers wear white and gold. They're healed of their diseases and their pain. They've also lost the thing that made them people, the capacity for doubt, for choice, for the particular human experience of suffering and deciding how to respond to it. Viktor wanted to end pain. What he built was a world without the ability to feel anything that might become pain. And it turns out those are the same thing. The show gets to this without making Viktor a villain, which is the hard part. He's wrong in a way that makes complete sense given everything he experienced. The tragedy is that the boy from the Undercity who watched people suffer became the source of the largest suffering of all, through an idea taken to its absolute limit. His arc closes with him choosing to undo it. The cost of that choice is his life. He accepts it. That's the show's answer to the question his character was asking the whole time. The right response to human suffering is to be present with it, to work at it, to let it mean something. Erasing it erases the humans along with it. The thing about Viktor's arc that makes it remarkable is that it works on you in both directions. You love him going in, you watch him do something terrible, and then you understand why, completely, without the show ever asking you to forgive him for it. That's an extraordinarily hard thing to write. Most stories either protect their characters from genuine culpability or strip them of sympathy entirely. Arcane refuses both exits. Viktor is fully responsible and fully understandable, and the show holds that tension all the way to the end. Viktor's arc is the most extreme version of something the show does with almost every character. It takes someone who started with the best intentions and shows you exactly which steps turned those intentions into damage. Jayce and Caitlyn go through the same process, just slower and on a smaller scale, which somehow makes it harder to watch. Jayce and Caitlyn start the show as the most optimistic people in it. By the end of season 2, they've both become versions of themselves they wouldn't have recognized. Jayce's descent is slower and in some ways more painful to watch, because it's driven by genuine good intentions the entire way. Every compromise he makes is in service of something real: peace, fewer deaths, stability. Each individual decision is defensible. The cumulative effect is a man who has slowly handed over every principle he started with in exchange for the ability to keep making decisions. He becomes Piltover's political face because he kept trying to fix things, and fixing things required power, and power required compromise, and the compromises kept coming. In season 2, after being trapped inside the Hex Core anomaly, reality and seeing alternate timelines where his technology leads to absolute catastrophe, he comes out genuinely broken. He's willing to kill Viktor to prevent what he saw. The idealistic inventor who believed in magic as something purely good has become a man who watched the future and decided the only responsible thing left is to stop it by any means available. He's wrong about the stakes being his alone to manage. He's just become unrecognizable in the process of responding to them. Caitlyn's arc in Season 2 is the one that gets the most criticism, and I think some of that criticism misses what the writing is actually doing. When people say she flipped into an authoritarian too fast, they're reading the surface. What drives her descent is something more interior. She had a clear shot at Jinx before the attack that killed her mother, and she didn't take it. She decided to believe Jinx might be reachable, that her history with Vi was worth preserving, that mercy was the right call. Her mother died because of that hesitation in her own reading of events. She spends Season 2 making sure she never hesitates again. Ambessa Medarda, the Noxian warlord who inserts herself into Piltover's crisis, is extraordinarily good at finding this kind of wound. She promotes Caitlyn, flatters her, positions her as someone with the strength to do what needs doing. Slowly, methodically, she isolates her from Vi, by making Vi's refusal to execute Jinx look like disloyalty rather than love. Caitlyn gets turned into an authoritarian by grief and guilt, and a highly intelligent predator who knows exactly which levers to pull. Her redemption comes from recognizing what she's become and choosing differently. In the final confrontation, she and Mel fight Ambessa together, and it's Mel who ends it, using her awakened magic to stop her own mother. Caitlyn is there fighting alongside her, wounded, still going. The show doesn't give her the victory, it gives her something harder to earn, the right side, after a season on the wrong one. What I kept thinking while watching all of this is that none of it feels like individual failure. It feels like something being repeated. And when I went back to figure out why, I realized the show had been building that case from the very first episode. The most devastating choice Arcane makes is one you might not notice until you're halfway through Season 2 and something clicks. Vi and Vander are the same character, written a generation apart. Vander was a revolutionary. He fought with heavy metal gauntlets, led a rebellion against Piltover's enforcers, believed the Undercity could only win through force. Then the rebellion failed. People he loved died, and he made a different choice. He buried the gauntlets. He made a deal with the enforcers. He built a fragile peace he knew was humiliating and maintained it anyway, because the alternative was more bodies. He prioritized the people directly in front of him over the political cause he believed in. Vi fights with massive mechanized gauntlets. She grew up watching Vander make exactly that compromise, hating what it meant, swearing she'd be different. By the end of Season 2, she's wearing an enforcer uniform. Same deal, different generation. The same love for the people immediately in front of her, producing the same agonizing political surrender. The show draws this parallel visually and refuses to explain it. The gauntlets appear, and you're supposed to remember. On the other side of this, Silco was made by Vander. Their falling out, which the show gives you in fragments rather than a straight explanation, left Silco with a wound that never healed. He built his entire identity and his entire operation on the belief that Vander was wrong, that power requires the willingness to do what Vander couldn't, that the Undercity's only path to dignity is through being more ruthless than the people above them. And then he adopted powder, and passed every bit of that damage straight down. The writing gives you a variable in Season 2 to prevent this from being entirely deterministic. Isha, the young girl Jinx protects, doesn't repeat the pattern exactly. Where Silco's love for Jinx was possessive enough that he tried to eliminate anyone who threatened her, Isha protects Jinx while preserving her agency, makes her own choice to sacrifice herself rather than having that choice made for her. It's a small variation. The show doesn't make a speech about it, but it's there. The suggestion that while history rhymes, people within it can choose to change the word. What makes the show devastating isn't the patterns themselves, it's the moments when the characters could have broken them and didn't. Those moments are decisions, and the decisions are the actual engine of the whole thing. Arcane runs on decisions. Every major turn in the story is a person making a choice under pressure, and the pressure is always real. Screenwriters call these turning points. A turning point is a decision that can't be walked back, a moment that shifts the story onto a different track and doesn't let it return to where it was. The test is simple. Is the story after this moment a different story from the story before it? If yes, it's a turning point. Arcane is built almost entirely out of them. Vi leaves Powder in the alley. She's just watched the monkey bomb kill her brothers. Vander is dead. She's looking at her little sister, the one who built the device, and she slaps her, screams at her, calls her a Jinx, and then walks away while Powder is on the ground crying, "Please come back, please, I need you, please." She does turn back, but by then Silco has already arrived, knife behind his back, intending to cut the last tie to his old enemy. And Powder, who has just been abandoned by the one person she trusted completely, throws herself at the only person still standing there. That's when Silco puts the knife away. The show is ruthless about this. It doesn't offer you an easy reading where Vi is the villain of that moment. It also doesn't let her off the hook. She made a choice under the worst possible pressure, and that choice created the thing that will haunt her for 2 full seasons. Silco didn't manufacture Jinx from nothing. Vi handed him the opening. The reason this scene is so hard to sit with is that the show refuses to give you somewhere comfortable to stand. You understand Vi completely. You understand Powder completely. The writing holds both of them with the same care, the same clarity, and gives you no exit. That's not cruelty. That's the show respecting you enough to not simplify something that was never simple. Silco gets offered everything he ever wanted in the season 1 finale. Zaun's independence, amnesty, trade routes, political recognition. The condition is that he surrenders Jinx to Piltover's authorities. He turns it down. He chooses his broken, toxic, genuinely loving relationship with his adopted daughter over the political goal he spent his entire adult life working toward. It's the most unexpected thing his character does, and it's also the most inevitable, because the show built him carefully enough that when the moment arrives, you understand exactly why there was never any other choice he could make. He loved her more than he loved the cause. These aren't plot moments. They're character moments that happen to move the plot. The difference is everything. Those decisions are why the Season 2 pacing problems actually hurt. Season 1 earned every moment of consequence through the specificity of what led to it. When Season 2 rushes those same moments, you feel the difference immediately. Season 2 is still very good. I want to say that clearly before I say the rest, because the rest is real. The pacing in Act 2 runs into trouble. Scenes that Season 1 would have let breathe get compressed into montages. Some of the spatial logic goes loose. Echo appearing to save Jinx at a moment where he had no way of knowing where she was or what state she was in. Things happening off camera to force a subsequent scene, rather than because the story earned the connection. The civil war between Piltover and Zaun that Season 1 spent 9 episodes building toward pivots fairly quickly into a united front against an external threat. And there's a version of that payoff that feels slightly mismatched from the setup. The character foundations hold because they were built so carefully in the first season, but the machinery that moves them around in Season 2 is occasionally visible in a way it never was before. You can see the plot working, when the best version of the show makes you forget there is a plot, which is actually what makes the way Season 2 ends so satisfying. Because the ending isn't rushed at all. It's the most patient thing in both seasons. It pays off something the show planted in the very first scene, and never mentioned again. The hex crystals appear in the very first heist scene. Powder stumbles on them in Jayce's penthouse in episode 1, pockets a few, drops one on the way out, and the explosion blows out half the building. That's the inciting incident. The thing that sets the whole story in motion is those glowing blue stones that Powder couldn't leave alone. In episode 2, Jayce gets knocked out by a second explosion from those same crystals and has a flashback. A child in a blizzard, a mage appearing with a glowing rune, the cold stopping. That rune is where Hextech came from, which means the object Powder accidentally weaponized in the first episode traces back to the childhood miracle that made Jayce obsess over magic in the first place. By the end of Season 2, that same chain of objects is the key to a temporal paradox that explains the entire history of Hextech. The mage who saved young Jayce was an alternate version of Viktor, accessed through the parallel dimension Jayce falls into in Season 2. That Viktor had already seen what the technology would cost. He gave the gem anyway, because a child was cold and needed help, which started Jayce on the path to Hextech, which led to Viktor's evolution, which is what created the version of Viktor who could travel between dimensions and give the gem in the first place. The loop is closed, and always was. The beginning was always the end. The show uses this not as a clever plot twist, but as a statement. Viktor's pursuit of progress, Jayce's pursuit of a miracle he could replicate, the whole technological history of Piltover, it all traces back to one moment of compassion. The horror and the beauty of Arcane exist inside that same gesture. Viktor chooses to undo what he built. He allows humanity to keep its free will, its suffering, its capacity for the exact kind of mess the show spent 2 seasons depicting. He saves the world by letting it stay imperfect. The cycle of violence between Piltover and Zaun doesn't end with a victory. It ends with people choosing not to continue it. Jinx removes herself. Viktor undoes his hive mind. Caitlyn walks away from Ambessa's war. Jayce accepts a future he can't control. The resolution of a show about systemic inequality and generational trauma is, quietly, that these things only stop when people decide to stop them, person by person, at personal cost. That's a harder answer than most shows are willing to give. Arcane gives it, and means it. The visuals are what got everyone in the door. They deserve every word written about them. But Fortiche could render every frame as a painting, and none of it would matter if you didn't care what happened to Vi and Powder and Viktor and all of them. The reason gaming adaptations fail isn't bad animation, or low budgets, or wrong casting. They start with what the character is, and build backwards toward justifying it. Arcane started with who these people were before any of that. A kid on a bridge, a dying scientist, a boy who believed in miracles, and let the story carry them forward into the version the game already knew. The game version of Vi is the end. The girl who wouldn't let go of her sister's arm is where it starts. Every character in this show was a real person before they were an IP asset. That's the thing you feel when you watch it, even if you can't name it in the moment. You're watching people, not properties. And at some point during the first season, that stops feeling like a pleasant surprise and starts feeling like the bare minimum, like the thing every show should be doing. Like you've been watching something done wrong for so long that seeing it done right feels almost shocking. Arcane didn't just prove that gaming adaptations can work. It proved that the only reason they fail is that nobody was willing to do what the creators did here, which is care more about the people than the property. Every bad adaptation since has been a choice. Someone chose the IP over the story. Arcane proves the story was always there.